Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to Utility Sports. Today, we are doing a live stream here on the NBA trade deadline. Tomorrow is the NBA trade deadline. This is going to be an interesting next 24 hours or so, actually a little bit less, about 20 hours until the NBA trade deadline. And there's going to be a lot of different names to watch. Some of those guys, John Collins, Aaron Gordon, who requested a trade from the Orlando Magic. The Clippers might look to make some moves. Marcus Morris, Lou Williams could be guys on the way out. Dallas Mavericks are going to be a team to watch. There are a whole collection of teams trying to figure out this roster. There might not be a true superstar traded this deadline, but there are a lot of really key players that could shift the NBA playoffs, shift the NBA finals, and there's a lot of different guys that could be important playmakers in the playoffs. We will see who gets moved, though. We'll be breaking down some of the news as we go here as well, if any trades do happen. Expect it to really start ramping up here. Austin, welcome to the stream. What's your thoughts so far on the trade deadline, what we could see moving forward?
Yeah, so some of the developments are Victor Oladipo is a guarantee to be moved for sure. So that's what we know to this point. John Collins came out and said also today he wants to stay in Atlanta his entire career. So that's kind of an interesting plot twist in all of this, the whole John Collins saga. So we'll have to kind of monitor that as well, because I was kind of expecting John Collins to, maybe want a new fresh start, new opportunity, but he does want to stay in Atlanta. He likes the Atlanta area, plans on really planting his roots there in Georgia. So all things considered, I think it's been pretty quiet for the most part. Mfiondu Kabengele got traded to the Kings and basically a nothing deal. So there hasn't been a whole lot of action, but I expect that to fully ramp up pretty quick.
Yeah, most definitely. The trade deadline is going to be very, very interesting this year in a lot of different ways. You had mentioned John Collins, and I think that's a great spot to really start our episode here on the trade deadline. I think he's going to be one of the names that is really hot, but possibly does not see a deal ultimately getting done because of the difficulty with the salary cap right now. He's only making $4.1 million. It's hard to find another player as good as him and as talented as him at that age. He's only 23 years old, averaging about 18 points a game. Last year, averaged nearly 20, shot 40% from three last year, shooting upwards of 37% from three, again, on over 3 attempts a game. He is a very, very good young player. I thought he was a perfect fit next to Trey Young. Then they brought in Clint Capella last year, brought in Bogdanovic this offseason, Danilo Gallinari as well. The salary cap space is the concern for the Atlanta Hawks there. I think they're going to get really close to the hard cap if they do hold on to him. I know you had mentioned he does want to stay there in Atlanta. However, he might also want to get the bag. He's 23 years old. I don't know if Atlanta can afford to give him the max contract. Do you ultimately think he gets moved? Where would he get moved if he does? Or will he stay in Atlanta?
I think it's going to be really, really hard for them to find a trade partner that truly makes sense. Obviously, I think basketball fit-wise, I think the Dallas Mavericks really work out. And they definitely need an athlete on that team. John Collins is an absolute freak as an athlete. But it's really hard to kind of see a package that makes total sense. I know there's a lot of Atlanta fans that don't want to move him. There's quite a few that actually do kind of want to move him. So there's a lot of varying perspectives on the whole John Collins trade. So I guess I ultimately don't see a move getting done at this point, just considering the money's going to be hard to kind of figure out. The player that you want back, it's going to have to be another young player that's still on their rookie deal is ultimately what it's going to have to be. So right. For me, that's kind of what I see.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised here, actually, because we had just put out a video the other day talking about the Mavericks and their possible interest in John Collins. Money-wise, it makes a lot of sense. They could send something like Maxi Kleber with Dorian Finney-Smith in return for John Collins and Tony Snell, which is really the only matchable contract the Atlanta Hawks would be willing to part with at this point to get a deal done there. And surprisingly, a lot of Mavericks fans were upset about that. I mean, Maxi Kleber is 29 years old, Dorian Finney-Smith, 27 years old, and the two of them don't even average the points per game together that John Collins does. I was very surprised by their distaste for that. I think that would be a home run move for my Mavericks. John Collins being 23 years old perfectly fits into the window with Kristaps Porzingis, Luka Doncic. I think the Mavericks are the team to watch in the pursuit of John Collins. However, I'm with you. I don't think he gets moved ultimately. I just find it hard to really see a package that Atlanta's really enticed by at this point. I think Atlanta would take some calls on him. However, at this point, I don't think he gets moved anywhere. We do have a question here from Sident C. He wants to know, where will Andre Drummond go? Austin, break down the Drummond situation. Will he be a buyout? Will he get traded? Rumor has it the Knicks are interested.
I was going to bring up the Knicks right away. I think the New York Knicks are definitely a team that will look to go after him. Obviously, he's an elite rebounder. He's definitely a guy that I could see fitting in with the Knicks in terms of, just getting more talent on that roster. I'm not exactly sure what the compensation would look like. What is New York willing to give up? I mean, it very well could be, Frank Ntilikina would be in that kind of deal. Obviously, they'd be willing to part with him. But to match money, I'm not exactly sure what length they would have to go to try to match, which that's one of the hardest contracts to ultimately match in the entire league, just considering that number is, I think, floating around $28 or so million for this season. So I'm not exactly sure who's going to be able to get a deal done for him. I think he's a very, very likely buyout candidate if it's not the Knicks.
Yeah, that is the team to watch. There is the New York Knicks. I also think the buyout market is really where Andre Drummond is going to land. I just think that is the most logical pathway. Like you had mentioned, you brought up that $28 million. A team would have to get to about $23 million in salary for these 125% rule. Just isn't going to happen. I just don't really see a team that has a pathway of enough players and contracts that, first of all, Cleveland's going to be interested in taking in, and also that are going to result upwards of that $23 million. I just find it very unlikely that he gets traded. He will get bought out and then likely land with a team. I mean, could you imagine if the Brooklyn Nets swooped in and added Andre Drummond in the buyout market? They would be a team. I think a lot of buyout candidates would want to go there. One of those being JJ Redick. He is negotiating right now with the Pelicans to terminate his contract. Austin, what's your thoughts on JJ Redick there in New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we could have possibly predicted had the season started and New Orleans came out. They basically tumbled right out of the gate. They've had a lot of issues this year. Van Gundy is not the coach for them. Unfortunately, I just don't think that's going to work out long term. We both did not like the hire right away. As soon as that happened, we knew that was going to be a disaster, and ultimately it has been. But JJ Redick, it's going to be really interesting to see where he lands. There's a couple of, pretty much any contender could use a shooter like him, but I'm kind of curious to see, what teams are really, really going to pursue him. Obviously, Drummond is going to be a very likely buyout potential candidate. Also, you have JJ Redick. So this buyout market's going to look pretty nice. Ultimately, it's a little better than what we've seen in the past for some of these buyout candidates.
Yeah, definitely. There is going to be some strong buyout players on the market for some of these teams looking to add nice rotational players, guys who are going to be meaningful come playoff time. JJ Redick, someone who can really stretch the floor. And also Andre Drummond, who, in my opinion, is the best rebounder in the NBA. I think those are the two guys that are really going to lead the buyout market, but there's also going to be some other nice options as well. Here, Sid and C, one of our viewers on YouTube, is asking, do you think Golden State should go get another superstar for Steph Curry? I mean, they would love to. There's just not really a pathway for them to do that at this point. There's not going to be a true superstar moved. One thing I would love for Golden State is actually a move where Kelly Oubre goes out, a third team gets involved, sends a nice player that is healthy to the Brooklyn Nets, and the Nets in turn send Spencer Dinwiddie to the Golden State Warriors. I think that's something that makes a lot of sense because the Warriors should really look to retool for next season when they have Klay Thompson back healthy. That is the addition of a star there, is Klay Thompson. He's one of the best two-way players in the league. A great floor spacer, something they badly need next to Andrew Wiggins on that offense. They're just completely missing his presence in a lot of ways, and I think adding someone like Spencer Dinwiddie could give them some more of that depth that they had back in 2015, 2016 before they brought in KD. Their bench was known to be one of the best benches in the league. They sacrificed that when they brought in Kevin Durant. Obviously, well worth the sacrifice. They got a top 5 player in the world at that time. But now, post Kevin Durant, they don't have that bench anymore. They're missing Klay Thompson right now. Moving long-term, I think that they should go out, try and find someone who's going to be a six-man type player for them. And I think Spencer Dinwiddie would be a great option. Austin, what's your thoughts on Dinwiddie to the Warriors possibly?
Personally, I do like that fit quite a bit. I think Spencer Dinwiddie to Golden State, that's an A move in my opinion. Obviously, Oubre would have to be out the door, but at the same time, I think in terms of the fit for the roster, it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, Oubre just it hasn't worked out as well as they were hoping initially at the start of the year. And I think basketball wise, Spencer Dinwiddie, very, very underrated player still to this day. And obviously he gets overshadowed by a lot of the players on the Brooklyn Nets. So I think that would be a phenomenal and underrated move for the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, definitely. Another team to watch here is the Los Angeles Lakers. We have a few people here asking about Los Angeles. They've kind of stumbled down to fourth in the Western Conference at this point. They're 28-16. LeBron James is out with a high ankle sprain. Anthony Davis is out for at least 2 more weeks. Do you think the Lakers need to make a move here this deadline, or do you think that they should stand pat with their roster?
Yeah, I guess it depends on who would they ultimately go get. I'm not exactly sure if there's a clear-cut target. I know there's everybody saying that they're in on Drummond, they're in on any buyout guy. I mean, of course, anytime you want to add talent to the roster, sure, you can throw out all those bigger names, but I don't know if it makes the most sense for them to go get Kyle Lowry, because when you have the whole team there, I mean, Kyle Lowry doesn't really fit. I mean, you're going to have Dennis Schroeder leading that second unit as the primary ball handler, and obviously the first unit will be held down by LeBron. So for me, Kyle Lowry is not a guy I'm expecting the Lakers to go after unless they want to include Schroeder in that, that's another thing I don't think they should do. But yeah, there's not a clear guy out there for me that I think that's notable that they would go after.
Right, most definitely. And the other issue, too, that they have now at this point is trying to make the money work in some of those deals. They're paying 2 maxes in LeBron James, Anthony Davis. And this is kind of the pathway of the CBA, how it works with salary cap management. When you aren't able to draft and develop homegrown talent through the NBA draft, you have trouble putting together trade packages because of salary cap restrictions. They don't have a lot of guys who were restricted free agents that they kept around. Rob Pelinka and Magic Johnson had really rebuilt this team. Obviously, Magic Johnson not there anymore. But they built this team back through free agency and through trades already at this point. They don't have any trade exceptions really to work with that are notable. They don't have a lot of ways to really bring in high-level talent. Their only guy to really match money at this point would be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They could use him as an asset in that. But at the same time, I don't really see the Lakers at this point moving on from KCP. I think that they're going to be a team to watch in the buyout market. However, during the trade deadline, I think it's going to be a little bit more quiet for them. At this point, it's just going to be a tough situation for the Lakers to really go out without the assets, without a lot of guys to match money at this point to make a lot of moves. Now staying in Los Angeles, Austin, your favorite team, the Los Angeles Clippers. Who do you think could be in play for the Clippers? I know there's some drama with Marcus Morris. Break down what's happening there on that front.
Yeah, so obviously Marcus Morris came out and said that something about bad business in his tweet today, and got a lot of Clippers and NBA fans kind of wondering what's going on with the Clippers. Are they lining up to make a move for Kyle Lowry? I mean, all it would take ultimately to get close with money is going to be a Marcus Morris, Patrick Beverley, those contracts being put together, sending it to the Raptors. But I'm not exactly sure if I believe that. I don't think that, ultimately, sending Marcus Morris away is kind of counterproductive. Obviously, he's been really, really good from 3 this year. I think he's shooting 45% from beyond the 3-point line. So it's kind of tough. You can't find that kind of shooting, pretty much anywhere. Obviously, if you would go get JJ Redick, sure, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, maybe JJ Redick is still kind of on their radar, a guy that could, be a spark plug off the bench for them. I think they're definitely looking at adding a playmaker. I think Lonzo Ball makes a lot of sense. I know in terms of contract, it would be a Marcus Morris having to be sent in that, or I'm trying to think of another way. Luke Kennard could be another way that they could get that done. But currently, Luke Kennard's only making, I think, $5 million this year. So his contract does not start, I believe, until next year. So for the Clippers, they're looking to add a playmaker. And ultimately, there's a couple of names I like. Lonzo Ball definitely makes sense. Kyle Lowry, I think that's a tougher pathway in terms of getting a point guard like him, because it sounds like, from what I've been hearing, that Toronto wants a lot for Kyle Lowry. I mean, they were asking for Tyler Hero from the Heat, and that's just not going to happen.
Right, yeah. Toronto definitely hoping to cash in on their veteran point guard. I just don't really see a pathway in which they get more than probably 1 first-round pick and maybe a semi-young player that can be a rotational piece for them. I would be surprised if a team really lines up to pay Kyle Lowry and pay for Kyle Lowry. That is an interesting situation to monitor. Austin, if you're running the Los Angeles Clippers, you're in the shoes of Jerry West. What direction are you going at the trade deadline? Are you going to be aggressive in a move for Lonzo Ball? Maybe really go after Kyle Lowry? What's your thoughts on that?
I think we have to kind of get out of that mindset that every single time the trade deadline comes around, you got to tear apart your roster, because I feel they've built a very, very good roster, a possible title contending roster. Obviously, them and the Lakers are going to be really, really tough to beat in the West. From that standpoint, though, I do believe they need to upgrade that point guard spot. I don't think Patrick Beverley is going to be that point guard you want to roll with into the playoffs. Not a good playmaker. Definitely, he can be a spot-up shooter, but he's not going to be that consistent knockdown shooter as well. So at that point, I think you have to go and get Lonzo Ball. But once again, you don't have a lot of first-round picks to utilize. I think they only have one that they could possibly use in a deal. I don't even know if they actually have access to that first-round pick. But at this point, you're going to have to try selling them on a young player like Terrence Mann possibly, and a veteran like a Marcus Morris, Patrick Beverley, whoever it may be, to kind of match that money. But I'm not sure if that's going to be the best offer that the Pelicans are getting for Lonzo Ball. To be quite frank with you, I think there's better offers out there for him.
Yeah, I definitely think there are as well. At this point, something I would be really interested. We haven't really talked about this much off the stream yet, Austin. I'm kind of just coming up with this now on the fly. But somehow a package where Terry Rozier lands with the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers send some money over to the Charlotte Hornets in a contract somewhat like, a Terrence Mann, maybe a Reggie Jackson, some low-level contract there. In turn, the Pelicans send Lonzo Ball to Charlotte to team up with LaMelo Ball, and the Hornets in turn get maybe Luke Kennard and Marcus Morris. Austin, what's your thoughts immediately on that?
Yeah, I mean, kind of, just quickly thinking about it, I think that's a win-win-win everywhere, to be quite honest with you. I think Luke Kennard and Marcus Morris really help out the Hornets in that sense. Obviously, Lonzo going to he goes to the Hornets. And then where did you have Mook going?
Yeah, so Morris and Kennard go to the New Orleans Pelicans in this.
You had them go to New Orleans, and then so I think that makes a lot of sense too. Obviously, you can get some floor spacers, because that makes a lot of sense to me. Both guys, Kennard and Marcus Morris, can stretch the floor for you. And Van Gundy loves those tough guys like Marcus Morris, obviously a bully. That is totally his type of player. So I think that they would be willing to do that on their part. And obviously the Clippers get a true hooper in Terry Rozier, a guy that can really handle the rock and make things happen for himself. But once again, it kind of comes down to that. Is he a great playmaker? No, he's not. He's a shot maker. He's a creator. But I mean, that's going to have to kind of replace. Lou Williams has been down in terms of his ability to get a bucket. I still think he's an effective player. He's not the same player that we've seen 2 years ago. So we have to come to terms with that if you're a Clippers fan. And I think Terry Rozier makes a lot of sense.
Right. There is definitely a slight drop off there with Lou Williams. Still a very good player, just not really in the echelon he was 2 years ago when you guys almost did upset the Warriors as the 8 seed that 1 year. And it's kind of a little disappointing, but I think Terry Rozier would be a perfect fit with you guys in terms of what he brings. He's an elite catch and shoot guy, shooting, I believe, over 45% from three on catch and shoot opportunities this year. Also, a very aggressive defender, can play physically for his size, can play the 1 or 2. I think he's a perfect complement to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on the offensive end. He would be a guy I would like to see land with the Clippers. However, I just don't really think that's the most likely scenario. I just wanted to run that one by you here. Now we're going to switch over to talking about the Orlando Magic forward, Aaron Gordon. He has requested a trade out of Orlando, and it's kind of clear why. The whole situation there hasn't played out well. They've got some issues with their front court. Remember, years past, they also had Jonathan Isaac. They kind of split minutes between the two of those guys. Aaron Gordon this year having a career year with Jonathan Isaac out. I think Aaron Gordon's looking for a change of scenery at this point. A little frustrated there in Orlando. And Austin, I want to know, what teams do you think could be good landing spots for Aaron Gordon? Are the Golden State Warriors one of them?
Man, that's kind of tough. Aaron Gordon's he's an interesting player at this deadline because I don't know where his value truly lies. I'm not exactly sure because he is 25 now and won't be 26 for quite a while. So Aaron Gordon's definitely a player that they're gonna want a first round pick for sure for him and more. I don't know what teams are really lining up to do that. Obviously, contending teams would be a little more apt to do it. However, we run into that same issue of how are we going to match money in those kind of deals? I think a non-contender that's been aggressively shopping for a four is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're definitely looking for a pathway to get a guy like Aaron Gordon. They want that athletic four. I think Minnesota makes a lot of sense in that regard. And I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on where you think he would land.
Yeah, the Warriors are an interesting team for sure. Kelly Oubre is that contract that they would move to try to get to the money for Aaron Gordon. However, they have a lot of issues with the hard cap. Committing $18 million not only this year, but next year to Aaron Gordon, I think would really limit their flexibility. I just don't really see them lining up actually for Aaron Gordon. And if they do make a move, it's going to be Kelly Oubre for someone who's going to be a little bit cheaper and probably a bench option at that guard position. I just don't really think Aaron Gordon is the solution for the Golden State Warriors. I think Aaron Gordon could surprisingly go to the Brooklyn Nets. I think the Nets could be players for him. I know they don't have a ton of assets at this point, but maybe they get involved in a 3-team deal where Spencer Dinwiddie does go somewhere. That's how they bring in an asset to send right back out the door to the Orlando Magic. That could be a pathway for them. Also, I think Aaron Gordon to the Cleveland Cavaliers makes a little bit of sense. I think they're kind of changing of the guard there in Cleveland. They're going to move on from Kevin Love and Andre Drummond over to Jarrett Allen, their new center that they acquired from the Brooklyn Nets in the 4-team trade involving James Harden. And then maybe Aaron Gordon being their long-term 4. I don't necessarily love that for them, but like you had mentioned, I just think it's a little bit drier of a market for Aaron Gordon. I don't think there's a lot of dream scenarios. I think Minnesota would love to grab him. It's just kind of hard. Are you able to sell the Orlando Magic on Jarrett Culver, a couple second-round picks? I just don't really know if you're able to at this point. Do you think Jarrett Culver is still a valuable asset at this point, Austin, or how do you think teams are evaluating Jarrett Culver after his first couple of years in the league?
It's kind of weird with Jarrett Culver. Obviously, I don't know if he still holds that much value. I really don't. But I mean, there are some teams that believe that they can unlock him. There's teams that think that it's just been a terrible situation in Minnesota, an absolute log jam at that wing spot for the Timberwolves. It's been kind of weird for them. Just a lot of mediocre players on that wing, at the wing spot. And I think that you could sell Orlando on the idea of possibly unlocking Jarrett Culver. Obviously, he was phenomenal at Texas Tech. Ended up, I think he was the 6th overall pick by the Timberwolves. And for them, I think it makes sense for both sides. I mean, Jarrett Culver gets a fresh start. Aaron Gordon gets a fresh start. I would actually really like a deal that could possibly get done there. But I'm not sure, if Orlando thinks that same way. Can we really unlock this guy, or is he a guy that, is basically tapped out and his ceiling is not much higher than it is currently. So it's kind of interesting to see where they have that value on him.
Right, definitely. He is a guy who I think is right around his ceiling at this point, but it'll be interesting to see how teams do go about evaluating that if they think that they can get a little bit more out of him. Now we're going to transition over to Lonzo Ball. You had mentioned him with the Los Angeles Clippers. We spent a little bit of time on him. Outside of the Clippers, Austin, are there other teams that could be interested in Lonzo? He's having a career year at this point, averaging a career high 14 points a game. A career low, actually, less than 6 assists a game, but that's just the way that they are running that offense there with Stan Van Gundy. He's averaging over a steal a game, over half a block a game, and most importantly, shooting almost 39% from 3 at this point. A very good season so far for Lonzo Ball. Are the Hawks in play? What other teams could you see making a move for Lonzo Ball?
I think this is not a move that's going to get talked about a lot, but I think Oklahoma City might be. I think that they obviously have a ton of assets, and they're really looking to build up that young core. And I think him and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander could really coexist in an offense together. And I think they're going to be big players at the deadline. Al Horford is definitely going to be a guy that's moved. So maybe some of those assets that they're able to, possibly bring in, they could reroute to the New Orleans Pelicans, the Lonzo Ball deal. So that's a team that's kind of under the radar for me in the whole Lonzo Ball sweepstakes.
Yeah, definitely. And the Thunder have just recently worked with the Pelicans as well. You know that those phone lines are ringing between those two teams in the deal for Steven Adams. I feel like both sides were pretty happy with how that trade went down, and I think a move there would be very interesting. I think the Thunder would love to grab Lonzo Ball. He'd be a great combo guard to put next to Shai Gilgeous. He can function off the ball now as a shooter with his growth in that department, but most importantly, could also help Shai Gilgeous-Alexander find some easy buckets. He is leading the league actually in unassisted baskets this year. Not something many would have expected for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander coming into the year. He has continued to grow into a phenomenal asset. And I just think at this point, they need to find someone who can help him in that backcourt. They've gotten some nice young play out of Lujan Stort and a few others, but I think Lonzo Ball would be a great improvement for them. Here we have a question about when is the NBA trade deadline. The NBA trade deadline is March 25th, which is tomorrow. So make sure you guys are tuning in. We will have another live stream up on our YouTube channel. Utility Sports is the name. If you guys are not subscribed, make sure to do so. And that's just going to be a really interesting day to watch. Like I said, there's not going to be real superstars moved, but there's going to be a lot of very important players on the move. One of those guys, Austin, being Victor Oladipo. I think he has played his last game as a Houston Rocket. He's out tonight for personal reasons. And at this point, it just doesn't seem like he will ever play another game as a Houston Rocket. They just had a recent 20-game losing streak that ended just the other night. Austin, what does Oladipo's trade market look like? He is on an expiring deal.
Yeah, so to me, it doesn't look very good. I don't know what the Rockets were doing to acquire him. That makes no sense to me why they initially had done that. It's hard when you're getting that expiring deal as one of the main pieces of trading your superstar. So that's something that was really, really mind-boggling to me. I don't think his value is great. Obviously, I think he's still averaging, is it 19 a game right now? I'm not exactly sure what his exact numbers are, but I don't think it looks great. There's a couple of teams that might bite on, possibly the Knicks, feeling like they're truly in contention as that 7 seed. I think they could, possibly take a look at Oladipo, kind of looking around the league. Other than that, I could see the Clippers potentially being interested, but I don't see that being entirely likely. Maybe it would be weird, but maybe the Spurs and the Rockets work out a trade where possibly DeMar DeRozan gets moved, because DeMar DeRozan could be that money matcher for him. Obviously, DeMar DeRozan's a better player, but two guys that aren't really happy with their current situation. So, that we've seen that before, where a deal could get done like that. Two guys unhappy, close on money. Maybe the Rockets send a little bit more in terms of assets to still have be somewhat competitive in their mind going in next season with John Wall and DeMar DeRozan.
Right, the Rockets are going to be a team very active. In fact, all 3 teams in the state of Texas are going to be very active. They're likely going to finalize that buyout of DeMarcus Cousins in the coming days here. There's no way that he will have a trade market just with the whole situation, how that's played out at this point. Like you had mentioned, Victor Oladipo, he's for sure going to find his way out the door. The Spurs are in the process of making a ton of decisions as well. I believe that they have 7 or 8 guys who are not under contract for next year on their roster at this point, which is a very high amount. DeMar DeRozan definitely being the headline player. They've already come to terms that they're going to part ways with LaMarcus Aldridge. I'd be surprised if he got traded. He will be a member of the buyout group as well, in my opinion. And DeMar DeRozan is really going to be the name that they shop. Also, the Dallas Mavericks, another team that's probably going to be fielding a lot of different calls. They have some decisions to make on this roster. They floated out Maxi Kleber's name a few times. I think a lot of teams would have some interest in Dorian Finney-Smith as a rotational wing player going into the playoff time. I think he would be a very valuable player for a lot of different teams. Josh Richardson, he just hasn't really worked out quite as well as I think Donnie Nelson would have hoped there in Dallas. And additionally, Tim Hardaway Jr. is expiring at this point. He's kind of having a down year compared to last year, so maybe the Mavericks could look to retain him for pretty cheap this offseason. But they have some decisions to make as well. Austin, if you're leading the Dallas Mavericks, you're in the shoes of Donnie Nelson. Which way are you taking Dallas?
Yeah, for that one, I'm definitely looking at JJ Redick off of the buyout market. I think that's something that they're missing is Seth Curry from last year. I think that's one of the unheralded heroes from that team last year. Played very very tough series against the Clippers. Seth Curry was a big reason. They had a lot of offensive success. They were the best and most efficient offense of all time in terms of the actual numbers behind it. And I think that they could look to replace that. JJ Redick, really, really good catch and shoot guy, great shooter in general. I think that you're super aggressive in the buyout market for him, possibly. And then I think that, trying to go and get John Collins at all costs, I think that makes a lot of sense. You don't want to overpay for him, but I think you should put together a very, very strong offer as well. So I think those two moves are definitely propelling Dallas into being, a for sure top 5 team in the West. I already think that they're at that point, but I mean, you can almost lock that for sure. And now I'm going to prompt you with this because I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts. The Houston Rockets are obviously in flux. What are some of the moves that they need to move to kind of get back on track? Or do you think it should be a complete teardown and, hope for the future?
First of all, they got to trade Victor Oladipo to Boston. I think that is the move that they really need to pull off. The Celtics, I think they're going to try to get Harrison Barnes. I ultimately think the Kings are going to be stubborn about it, which doesn't make any sense to me. The Kings are going to be the Kings. I mean, they do what they do. They're not going to move him. The Celtics have a massive trade exception right now. Oladipo fits into that pretty well. The Rockets should be looking to facilitate a trade for him, try and get any asset at all that they can, hopefully one further into the future rather than sooner, because this thing is so broken right now that if I'm running that team, I'd much rather have future assets at this point that I could look to really flip that are going to hold their value for a while rather than getting a Celtics pick this season. I just think that's my thoughts on Victor Oladipo. I'm also looking to move Eric Gordon, even if I have to attach a second round pick or two to get him off the books. I don't want him around anymore at this point. He's under contract for 3 more years. I'm just not interested in that situation. If I'm running Houston, I'm buying out John Wall and I'm putting the ball in the hands of Kevin Porter Jr. and telling him he's running 20 pick and rolls a game with Christian Wood until I can really see what those two players can be together. And at that point, I mean, we're already losing games. There's no point to even hold up anything with John Wall here. You should do well by the player, buy him out of his contract. I know you're going to pay a ton of it anyway, but it's not like him staying around is going to help you guys win at this point. You got to buy him out, do well by his agent, try and build up some relationships there, especially when it's a brand new GM who's never been a GM before. They also have a brand new coach in Steven Silas. They've got to focus on building some connections there in the agency field, in my opinion, at this point, and then go on at that point looking to put the ball in Kevin Porter Jr.'s hands and then hope that you get lucky with some ping pong balls in the lottery, because you guys, they badly need Cade Cunningham. And if they don't get Cade Cunningham this offseason, it's going to be a mess in Houston for a little bit longer, in my opinion. Kuminga, I like as a player. Jalen Green, I like. Jalen Suggs, even a very nice player, but I don't think any of those guys really turn around the Houston Rockets like Cade Cunningham could. And at this point, I'm just trying to get any value out of the assets I have now at this point. I think they did an okay job with the PJ Tucker deal, but the rest of it, they got some work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good plan for the Rockets moving forward. I mean, it's kind of weird. It looks like, they tried their best to still contend. Obviously, they ended up acquiring John Wall, and that did not work out because James Harden wanted out, and they did a bad job on the James Harden deal and potentially set up the eventual NBA champion Brooklyn Nets. I think that they are the favorite going into the playoffs, and ultimately really, really tough stretch by the Houston Rockets. Let's kind of get to some more of these comments here. Let's take a look at this one here. And starting lineup after the Reddish for Lonzo trade. See, that's kind of interesting, Sheldon. What do you make of that lineup if they end up moving Reddish straight up for Lonzo, or if they have to add an asset or two?
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing there. Atlanta is going to be one of the teams to watch simply because of where their roster is at this point. With Bogdanovich out, it's going to be looking like Trey Young starting at the point guard, Lonzo at the 2, DeAndre Hunter, once he's fully healthy and back and everything, starting at the 3, John Collins starting at the 4, Clint Capella at the 5. And I'm just not, quite frankly, in love with that lineup all in all together. I understand the value of bringing in Lonzo, especially for his perimeter defense, ability to cut guys off on straight line drives. You have Capella as a rim protector. But still at this point, Lonzo, I don't think he really takes that much pressure off of Trey Young because Trey Young doesn't do what Steph Curry does in a lot of different ways. I know that's the easy comparison. And when he has the ball in his hands, sure, he looks a lot like Steph Curry. But he doesn't run off of screens like Steph Curry does. He doesn't cut back door like Steph Curry does. He doesn't manipulate screens off ball in ways that the greatest shooter of all time does. And until he starts doing that, Lonzo Ball is not going to be extremely effective there as a passer. I think, he's a great fit with Capella. He's a great fit with John Collins. But ultimately, if your plan is to help Trey Young get better off the ball, the issue isn't your point guard play. They brought in Rajon Rondo for this, one of the best passers still in the NBA, and it really hasn't shifted too much. The issue is Trey Young and his commitment to moving off the ball and just his fluidity moving off the ball. He hasn't done that throughout his career. Didn't do that at Oklahoma at all. Hasn't done that in his first 2.5 years in the NBA. Just because you bring in Lonzo Ball doesn't mean he's instantly going to do that. That's my one issue with the Atlanta Hawks. I think that they have a lot of talent. They're very young, so I'm not trying to be cynical about them. They're going to be moving forward in a very good direction, but I just don't necessarily think Lonzo Ball is the perfect addition for them because of some of those reasons I mentioned.
Absolutely. I'm going to go down here to real quick to any update on the Drummond buyout. We have not heard anything yet, but it sounds pretty likely that he is going to be a buyout candidate unless the Knicks ultimately decide to pull a trigger on a trade and acquire him. But I don't know, once again, what that would kind of look like. And I'm going to go here to how do you see the Lakers transitioning for life after LeBron in a couple of years and still being competitive. I think it's really going to it's going to depend on, can AD lead a team on his own? In New Orleans, he was not able to do that. I think to make that work and make them truly competitive and a contender, they have to go get another star that obviously complements Anthony Davis. I mean, who knows? Maybe we could possibly see Trey Young be that guy if they could sign him in free agency or acquire him via trade. But I don't see this entirely likely that, it's the LA Lakers that they're going to get a star, but AD on his own, I don't think is a contending team.
Right. Yeah. I just don't think so either. And the one thing too, I'm having issues with is seeing what life's going to be like after LeBron, because I honestly think LeBron's going to outlast the majority of their roster at this point. Still there with Los Angeles, guys like Marc Gasol, they're going to come in and out. KCP, I think that LeBron's going to be a Laker longer than Kentavious Caldwell-Pope still is going to be at this point. There's just not a lot of guys on this Lakers team that I see being a Laker 4 or 5 years from now, other than possibly still LeBron James, even at his age, and Anthony Davis. And at this point, as long as LeBron's there, AD's going to be fine. That team's going to be good. But post LeBron, I'm a little lower on Anthony Davis than the rest of the world, I think. I still think he's a top 10 player, but I think him alone isn't enough to get you into the playoffs in the Western Conference. He's proven that multiple times with some of his shortcomings there in New Orleans, even when he had very quality players around him like Drew Holiday, also DeMarcus Cousins pre-injury, had a few other nice pieces like Rajon Rondo. We saw playoff Rondo come through. I mean, he won one playoff series with the New Orleans Pelicans in 7 years. At this point, Luka Doncic, halfway through his third year, almost upset the Clippers last year. If Kristaps Porzingis didn't get injured, maybe we could have seen that. There's just a big difference between those two players, in my opinion, when it comes to really winning basketball, especially come playoff time. And I think the Lakers are going to be in a world of hurt when LeBron ultimately does hang it up, unless they do get that star like you mentioned. And that could be a player who's not even in the NBA yet at this point. It'll be interesting to see, maybe a guy like Cade Cunningham, which is a long time down the road, but that's what we're going to be kind of looking at for the Lakers, like you mentioned, Austin.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else I want to prompt you with, let's kind of refocus back on the trade deadline. Are there any players that could be a huge shock if they were moved? Are there any that come to mind that are not currently on the radar, but all of a sudden if they're moved, I mean, it just throws everything out of whack?
That's a great question. Kyrie Irving would be one of those guys. I don't think that he's ultimately going to get moved. Russell Westbrook would be a a real mind boggler if they're able to find a trade partner there. Bradley Beal, I mean, that's the name that everyone was loving to throw out, half a year ago, 3 months ago. That's just not going to happen, in my opinion. Look here, I think James Wiseman would really, really surprise me if he ends up getting traded. Maybe the Warriors feel, hey, we should go all in on a player. Send Kelly Oubre, attach James Wiseman, attach that Timberwolves asset that they have from the D'Angelo Russell trade. And at that point, maybe they have a situation that they can open this up, make a big-time move, bring in a guy. But I would be really surprised if they're quick to move on from James Wiseman, just with what we've seen from him this year so far. He's been a little injured, missed a few games, but he is a very, very good young player, good athleticism. I think he's a perfect complement to what they have on that roster long-term. He's going to be a beast at the center position, both offensively, defensively, on the glass. I think he's going to be a great piece for them, and I would just be really shocked if they do move him.
And that would be really, really surprising if they ended up moving James Wiseman, just considering where they're at. And I think once that team is healthy, once again, with Klay Thompson coming back, who's a huge part of what they're able to do, I think that could be a very, very dangerous team moving forward next season. So another question for you: how do you think Trey Young would do at shooting guard? We talked about this a little bit. Iverson went from a point guard to shooting guard and thrived in the new role, and then took them to the NBA Finals. Sheldon, what's kind of your thought on that? And do you think that's a realistic thing to think about?
The one thing with Iverson is just because he was listed at a shooting guard doesn't mean he was really playing shooting guard. I mean, that was more of a defensive thing where Iverson wouldn't pick up point guards defensively. Iverson still had the ball in his hands a lot at the top of the key. And sometimes he just catch it on the wing and ISO. I mean, it's just not the way that the Hawks are going to operate. Trey Young's not going to play shooting guard. He's definitely not going to guard a ton of shooting guards. And I just don't really know if that's the move for the Atlanta Hawks. I think that they're in a tough situation. I think there's a lot of overreactions going on right now, too, in terms of what their trade situation looks like. They've won a lot of games since they moved on from Lloyd Pierce. They made the right decision. They brought in the right interim head coach, obviously an internal move there. And I just think that Atlanta needs to kind of stay put, plan on keeping John Collins. I mean, we haven't even gotten to see Bogdan Bogdanovic with this team very much. DeAndre Hunter, he was playing very nice before he got injured earlier in the year, kind of threw off some of their momentum. They're a good young team. I mean, we've seen Capella play, 25 games, 30 games with them at this point since they made that move. They just need to run this thing a little bit. A lot of people think that every team needs to make a lot of moves when their guys are still young. And sure, sometimes those moves could set you up for great future success. But at the same time, Trey Young is 21 years old. You don't need to be rushing into making some long-term decision here, especially when it comes to a 23-year-old power forward who fits perfectly off the ball, off of Trey Young. I just think that they're best suited to roll this roster over for another year. They've got guys under contract other than John Collins, who they have restricted rights on. There's just no reason for them to rush into any type of move at this point if I'm Atlanta.
Yeah, once again, I agree completely. I don't think that they have to jump into anything. I mean, they have to kind of see this roster play through. Obviously, there's a couple of teams like that. I think the Timberwolves are another example. They've not been able to see their whole core work together, but I think Atlanta's obviously, quite a bit better than Minnesota in that regard. Atlanta just needs a little bit of time. They need to, essentially develop chemistry. I mean, you can't have chemistry if you don't play together. So that's how that goes. I'm gonna display here Julian. He says, absolutely love the work that you guys do and truly do enjoy your content. Always recommending your channel to my fellow sports fans. Julian, thank you so much for your continued support. We really, really enjoy doing this for you guys. And we're going to get pretty close to wrapping this up. We're going to have some concluding thoughts on the trade deadline. And I'm going to give you two prompts here. The first one is, who is the biggest name to get moved tomorrow or tonight?
The biggest name to be moved is going to be Aaron Gordon. I don't see players like Andre Drummond actually getting traded. I don't think JJ Redick gets traded. I think Aaron Gordon is going to be the actual biggest name to get traded. I would be surprised if the Pacers move Malcolm Brogdon. He would be my answer if he did get traded. However, at this point, I just don't think he's going to. I don't think John Collins will actually be traded. I think it's going to be Aaron Gordon or possibly Spencer Dinwiddie. Spencer Dinwiddie, not a big-time factor for this season because of his injury. However, long-term, I think he could be a guy who's going to be really, really good in a new city for the next 4 or 5 years after this year.
And then my final prompt to you is, what is one team that has to make a move in order to really be relevant this season? What team has the most to lose this trade deadline?
The Dallas Mavericks have the most to lose this trade deadline. And it's not even necessarily for this season, but it's for the next 7 months or so, what really plays into the moves that they make right now. Because at this point, if they don't make a move for a guy like John Collins, who they could have restricted rights on, they're kind of setting themselves up for some failure. In order to open up a max slot, if they don't move on from any of the guys on their roster, they'd have to decline the option on Josh Richardson. They'd have to move on from him. And then at this point, they'd also not be able to keep Tim Hardaway Jr. And you're kind of looking at a blank slate of Luka Kristaps, Dorian Finney-Smith, Maxi Kleba, and a max slot for whatever player. Whereas if they went into this deadline, made a move for a guy like John Collins, who's restricted, they could move on from both Maxi Kleba and Dorian Finney-Smith in that deal, hold on to Josh Richardson, keep him around, wait to match the offer on John Collins until also having a max slot, use the max slot, and then also even be able to go up to the max on John Collins to keep him in town. That is the best move for the Dallas Mavericks, because you could be looking at a big four possibly, although, John Collins maybe not the most notable player in a big four, and the guy they're going to get in free agency is not going to be a super big time player, but nonetheless, you're looking at a big time addition at the forward spot next to Kristaps Porzingis, long term, who's 23 years old, fits the timeline perfectly, and also the ability to add another nice player that could fit around your roster this offseason just by making one simple move where you trade a 29-year-old, a 27-year-old, maybe a low-end asset for a 23-year-old who is developing on both ends of the floor.
Absolutely. And we are going to conclude there. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. We had a lot of fun doing this stream. Once again, I do want to shout out ZZ, saying that we're doing a great job. We really appreciate that. We had so much fun in this stream, and we cannot wait for tomorrow. Sheldon will be streaming for part of the day tomorrow, kind of breaking it all down for you guys, and we will continue to talk with you throughout the week.
Yeah, make sure you guys tune in tomorrow at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. That is about when the stream will be starting. Thank you guys all so much for your support, and we'll catch you in the very next video.